Well, the book channel is back for its weekly update. And this week we're talking about what, Mark, on the book channel?
We're talking about Wind and Truth. It's been how many days since we talked?
I think we did a video a couple days ago, but you know what? This is the first one of the year, so in some ways it's momentous.
Started 2025 off with a bang. Yeah.
Okay, so we had a lot of requests from folks who wanted us to continue on our series where we talk about all of the Stormlight books, and we have now finished Wind and Truth, both of us have, and so we're continuing on with the series. I should have done a good job of looking back at the other series and seeing what formatting we use for that, but we didn't, so this was going to be very strange because the last one was 3 years ago?
I think we included some like recaps. I don't know if we're gonna do recaps.
Yeah, we talked about like, okay, what happens? Because I think we were like, maybe somebody will want to rewatch these to like learn what's going on.
Yeah, no, now it's just a review.
Yeah, exactly. It's gonna be 10 years before anybody wants to remember what's going on. They're not gonna be going to this.
I will be watching our own videos. Like, what the hell did I think 10 years ago?
Yeah. Okay. So I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna do high-level conversations about what we liked, what we disliked. Maybe give a score and kind of ranking on where we would put it with the other Stormlight books, and then we'll go a little bit more in depth with each of the characters and the storylines and kind of reacting to those. So if you just want the short version, hopefully we're done with that in the next 10 to 15 minutes. I'll put a timestamp.
And this is full spoilers. Yes. Travis can't handle spoilers. So
Well, it's full spoilers because I figure
if I would say one thing, you'd be like, "That's a spoiler." Well, put it in the spoiler section.
That's true, but also, like, if people are watching an hour-long video about this stuff, like
a month after it's come out,
yeah, like why are you tuning into this review, this discussion that once it's already been out for a while? So I've got my rum eggnog, and you're drinking Jack and Coke, and this now we're gonna die. This is the first alcohol version of this. Anyway,
yeah. So kick things off. High level, I would say I liked it. We talked about score a little bit before. I said like around a 7.5 for me.
Okay, yeah. I think you've bumped it up since you've pivoted a couple times.
I said 7, and then I said like maybe 8. I don't know. I thought more about it, and I think
you've settled on.
I think I've settled on like 7.5. I don't remember what I gave for the other books too, so maybe my grading's like totally inconsistent. Yeah. But I would say Rhythm of War is pretty clearly 5th for me.
Yes.
And then I think Way of Kings is 4. Wind and Truth is 3, and then it's another pretty big jump up to Oathbringer and Words of Radiance. Yeah. And I think Words of Radiance is a better book. I like the ending and climax and emotional payoff of Oathbringer the most in the whole series. That's why those are that's where I've landed.
So I am basically right there with you, the rankings. I remember when I did Rhythm of War, I think I gave the review. Like, I think I gave it a more favorable review and or setting than I've thought about since I went back and reread it before. And then also had a couple years to reflect on it. And just like, this is not about Rhythm of War, but I do feel like Rhythm of War is very long and not very much happens in it. And this book certainly did not make Rhythm of War a better book, which we can talk about towards the end of this video. But I do think that this is pretty good. I would probably give it an 8.5, only because like I love the Stormlight stuff so much that it's difficult for me to find one of these things. Like, I just get so much joy even if I think that there are a lot of flaws, and I think this one, certainly there are some flaws.
I mean, it's cool that like something will take over our lives for a month or whatever after it comes out. You know, like we're gonna read it, then we're gonna discuss it, then we're gonna keep thinking about it and doom scroll all the subreddits.
And for the next decade, I will be spending a bunch of time talking about this. As bump my mouse so that we don't lose the camera or the monitors. But I'll be talking about this for the next decade and thinking about it, because actually we should say a lot of people that are watching this might not know that there's no Stormlight mainline novel for the next 10 years.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't give that clearly in the book, which for marketing reasons, very understandable that you wouldn't be like, see y'all in a decade.
Yeah, in fact, it gives a misleading answer, which is at the end of the book. It says like, our heroes will return in Stormlight 6 coming in the near future. I believe it says exactly near future. And I was like, Brandon, this is very misleading, because all your other books have been 2 to 3 years apart in this series, and you have publicly said multiple times that you're spending a decade away from it to write other stuff.
Details. Near in the Cosmere sense.
Yeah. Well, not near even in the Cosmere sense, because
because then there's going to be those 5 books, and then there's the next couple of Mistborns and Dragonsteel, maybe.
I guess so, but not near in the Cosmere sense, because everybody else is going to spend 80 years waiting for this book. So Anyway,
so things that we liked to start. There's two big things I liked a lot. One, I would say, is like the overall plot and like where things ended and what happened. Like, I don't really have too many complaints. We talked about how neither of us are like big into like backseating. Like, the author should have done this.
Yeah.
There's some plot points that I think we're waiting to see on after book 5 because it's unclear exactly where things are going. But as of right now, for like the gap that's happening, I think everything ended up in a really cool spot.
Yeah, I am not, for instance, I think it is cool that Odium and Honor like merged into Retribution. I think that's a cool ending. I think, even though I think people had this theory for a very long time, Kaladin becoming a herald makes a lot of sense. I liked Zeth's story, even though I know people have memed on this being like a Kaladin book, because at the end he gets like the coolest moment or whatever. And so I really liked all of that.
I also like that like they kind of got scattered to the winds, which like I think some people feel weird about because this is supposed to be like an ending, but it is like a midpoint really in the series. So I like that they were kind of like everyone's in a different spot now. It did suck that there wasn't any like big team up moment in this book, but given that it is in the totality, the middle of the book, the middle of the series, it makes sense.
So I really liked, to your point, like just how things feel like they are pausing. Like he got everybody to a really interesting point for like a 10 to 80 year in-game or in-world break, or in a 10-year IRL break. Like it felt very definitive. I was really worried that it would end on some crazy cliffhanger. And in a sense, right, like there's a bunch of things that are unresolved, but it felt pretty much like, okay, and now we're done. And now we're going to check in and see how everybody's doing a decade from now. So I thought that was all really cool. The other stuff I really liked enjoying, for me, I'm really big into the Cosmere-wide lore. And you know what? We should have even clarified what spoilers we will have and which ones we want.
Everything is spoiled.
You want to have every Cosmere book in this.
Well, in theory, because like Mistborn and Stormlight have been converging. And obviously the last book of the latest Mistborn really started that convergence. And then this one was like, bam, now it's like a full-on, this is like the end of Act 1 of the Cosmere, not just of Stormlight.
Let's stick to, like, I'm thinking right now, just because I'm sure a lot of people haven't read like Elantris yet or whatever, or some of the secret projects. So
we won't spoil
I think yeah, Mistborn mostly, Warbreaker, Stormlight,
and
etc.
talking about the perspective of Stormlight, but like there's a bunch of shards, and it was a shard from another series, and we have to kind of talk about it.
So we'll avoid as best as we can secret project stuff and Elantris stuff and all that type of stuff. These more fringe books that some people might be looking towards the next 10 years of their life. Yeah, exactly. So, but I should, as I was saying, I really like all the deep lore. Like, it felt so cool to learn to hang out with the heralds, because like it's interesting because you get to see just like the surface level of so much stuff over the first 4 books. And while I think there are some ways he could have done it differently, it felt very satisfying for me as a Cosmere and Stormlight fan to get just like time at so many of these different moments, to learn a lot about the different heralds, to learn a lot about, like, we get to see people come in from Ashen, and learn about Braze a little bit, and just all these cool moments I thought were really neat.
I think both of us had the moment too where you're reading the book and you get to day 9.
Yes, I
Tanavast POV, and then you flip the page and it's like, God did this, and you're like, I need to read this.
Yeah, both of us were reading late at night during the holidays, and I messaged him, and he was a little bit ahead of me by like a day, I think. And both an in-world day, I keep saying in-game, in-world day and also an IRL day. And I just sent him a picture of, you turn the page and it lists all the POVs, and the first one is Tanavast, and you're like, oh my God, this is so cool that like we're just going all the way in. And it's just wild how much it went from like 0 to 60 in terms of just like dumping a ton of Stormlight lore and all that stuff. So those were things we liked. I do want to make sure that people understand, and we'll talk more about things that we like, but I know, as always is the case, it's easier to talk about things that you were frustrated by. So even though we both really like this book, we certainly have a lot to talk about in terms of its issues.
And I'm sure it will end up taking up the majority of this video because it's just more to dive into, whereas you're both like, yeah, I like that thing, that was cool, and then you move on, whereas there's more debate in, I guess, a critique. The other thing I'll say I liked a lot, other than like the plot, big picture plot, was the structure I think the 10-day thing worked really
Yes.
well for a climactic book. This is one of the few Stormlight books, I think Words of Radiance being the only other one, where there was not like a definitive slog section. Because normally Brandon divides them up part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this had twice as many parts in a sense. And while some of the days were somewhat slower, because there was so much POV swapping and because so much was happening and the fact that each part was smaller, I didn't feel like I hit a particular slog, though sometimes there were problems in the execution. Overall, the 10-day structure really.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it as well. I do agree that it stopped from anything feeling like a slog or whatever. You're not sitting in Kolinar forever like you are in
or the Tower.
Kaladin hanging out, being depressed. So yeah, I thought that was all really cool, and I felt like all of our characters, almost for the most part, had a lot of agency that they didn't normally have in previous books, which I think helped out a lot. And so, because there are just a lot of times where, like, again, with Rhythm of War, Kaladin is just spending a lot of time bummed out, or like you have a lot of characters that just are, even in other books, you've got moments where Shallan's just kind of along for the ride and trying to figure stuff out. And in this, you get to see a lot of characters taking a much more active role, with the exception of one or two, which we can talk about. But yeah, so I liked all that stuff. But before we dive into the character POVs, there are a couple high-level issues that both Mark and I, to different degrees on each side, felt about we took issue with. Do you want to kick us off with? I know the one that I feel you've had since chapter 1.
I'm trying to mull over how to talk about this. Well, I guess there's two. I mean, like there's some like smaller things, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but the big one for me was the writing itself. It's never been like the selling point of Brandon's work, but I agree with a lot of people online who have said it became too modern in this one. And I spent a lot of time trying to think about it because I've been reading the discourse back and forth. Brandon's even responded to this criticism, being like, I've always been a little bit modern. And so I guess the things I would say is, one, yes, it's always been modern, but it's like a gradient, and he's gone way further this way. And it's not just that it's modern, because he's always used modern language because he wants it to be clear and readable, but it feels much more like internet modern than like, professional modern. Things like Sill's gonna sill, and like let's go kick some fuse ass.
And
like,
for real this time.
For real this time. Like,
yeah.
It's a lot of like almost modern slang rather than just like modern word choice, which is a very different thing to me.
Like I don't want to. I've not even made this analogy yet, but I guess I will. Although I worry it's like a bit of a cliche, it does feel a little Marvel-esque. Like in terms of,
said that a lot.
So I haven't read as much of the online conversation as Mark, but yeah, it feels there's a lot of moments where it's like, let's go kick some fuse ass, It's just like stuff like that where you're like, ooh, this feels a little bit like mainstream movie phrasing versus in the past where you just had other phrasing for really cool moments.
Yeah, and I think people always what always happens though is like you take an anecdote from this book and then someone finds an anecdote from like Mistborn Era 1 or Elantris, and it's like, yes, it's always been there.
Yeah, you can find Lift saying goofy stuff and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, so it's always been there. It's not that it's not been there before, but it's just the quantity and I guess the quality of it has really shifted. And I think it started in Rhythm of War, but it really hit hard here, where it just was jarring to be like in moments like pulled out from that.
Yeah, and I think, look, one of the high level issues that I have with this book a bit, which I think plays into this, and this is a little bit of theorizing, but as Mark and I both come from the games world, there's always a lot of dialogue around like, oh, this game was released too early. And you can sort of see like a lack of polish. You can see some issues with it, some bugs, I guess. And it feels like to me, Brandon, it did get delayed already. But it feels like he was kind of often doing stream of consciousness writing, right? Like one of the things we know is that Brandon can write very fast, and it just felt like he's just like, yep, and this happens, and perhaps either because there was not enough time on the editor side, or maybe just like a different editing team, I don't know. But a lot of these things that I think in the past would have been identified as like, hey, this feels out of sorts for what we're used to from like Stormlight dialogue or tone or any of that type of stuff. It just didn't come through. So, that was definitely a bit of an issue.
Yeah, and I think for the reason it matters is because this is supposed to be his magnum opus, his like thing that's going to stand the test of time. And writing modern's fine because you can't. That's what it is. But like writing modern slang is going to age really poorly the same way like XD RAR.
Yeah, there's a reason Lord of the Rings I think is fairly timeless, and part of that is because it has its own. You're entering a world in terms of the prose.
Yeah,
that just like is not tied to a particular era. You know.
Yeah. So the other thing I'd say as the other kind of like big picture criticism, and these books have always been about mental health, but it feels like for whatever reason, these topics have gotten more to the surface of the characters' thoughts and the plots and these sorts of things. And because it's a really important topic, and because Brandon cares, he wants to do it like right. And it feels like, people have said this and I kind of agree, it feels like a therapist is in the room with him as he's writing these scenes, or like this is feedback he's gotten from people with these conditions that say this is how my lived experience is. So he kind of writes it almost word for word with how we as contemporary people in the Western world think about these things. And it gets put into there and it becomes, again, kind of like the modern text. Again, a very modern interpretation or a modern discussion of these topics.
Yeah, the language and all that stuff, you start to feel like suddenly you're on like an internet forum where people are discussing it.
Up a couple times, there's some of these phrases where it just feels very much, not that it's wrong or it shouldn't, I disagree with it, but just like it's not then filtered through the like fantasy lens and turned into what should be a fantasy version of this.
And to your earlier point, people will find, like, it's not the first time that people have talked about their mental health issues in these books and all that type of stuff, but, you know, Mark and I were discussing how I think maybe around the time Oathbringer came out, Brandon was doing, you know, video content where he was like, yep, Kaladin has depression. And both of us were like, oh, that totally makes sense with the way that he's conveyed in the thing. But it was never specifically outlined because it just felt like a struggle that this character was having. Whereas in this, you start to get like very clear conversations around like 2025 ways of talking about stuff. This is, by the way, centuries after, centuries of development around mental health conversations and all that type of stuff. Whereas like in this, Kaladin's like a therapist for the first time, you know, like it just feels a little strange. So
yeah. And he said earlier on in the series, it's like this is about people who have these disorders or problems, and then they have to deal with them in a fantasy world. It's not like it defines them, but it's like Kaladin has depression, but he's also a bridgeman, and he also is like discovering these ancient oaths and doing all this other stuff. And it feels like that his depression, for example, has risen to the top of some of the things that define
the character attribute.
Yeah. So that's like, I don't care that it's risen. I care that now that it's risen and it's on the surface, it's such a literal modern version.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. I think in terms of some other issues I had, it really depended on the day. And I know he's always done this, but there was some POV switching there that I felt was fairly unnecessary. In terms of, you would get this crazy moment where Kaladin would stand up and he'd pick up his sword and it'd be time for him to fight Nail to the death. And and then we just switch to like, Yasna's got exhaustion spread around her. She stayed up all night long trying to get ready for a debate. And for me, like, look, I know he's done POV switching, and fantasy books love to do this type of thing. It keeps the scenes dynamic and that type of stuff. But there were frequent times where I thought this scene would have stood better as a cohesive component without switching between multiple. So it kind of reminds me, I think a lot of people gave a lot of criticism to Star Wars Episode 1 when it came out, where you have like Duels of the Fates, which is like the epic battle between the Jedi and Darth Maul, and then you're like switching and it's like a battle of the death, crazy things are happening, and then you just switch to fucking this 9-year-old kid in a thing being like, now this is pod racing, and like, it was definitely not as egregious as that. But there were moments where I was heavily invested in a scene, and then we just get shoved off into another place, you know, and then by any times, by the end of that scene, I'd be heavily invested in that one, and then we'd just be drawn off to a different one afterwards. And so I know that he writes all these different POVs separately. Like, he writes the storylines almost as like separate pillars before they kind of converge. Yeah. And then I'm sure he kind of cuts in on these different ways, and I just feel like at times I would have preferred that they didn't do it as much.
Yeah, I mean, he always swapped POVs, but usually it was confined to like a chapter belonged to someone, or it would swap a little bit, but now you would get multiple POVs every single chapter. And it helped with the pacing, I think, but it did come at some of those.
Yes, sometimes where I'm like, oh, please don't do this yet. So I'm trying to think if there are any other high-level issues that we had. Nothing is really springing to mind for me. So I think what we can do is just start getting into what we liked and disliked about each of the different character POVs.
We starting with Big D or saving him for the end?
I think we save him for the end. because there's so much to talk about, and he's so instrumental towards the ending. But I don't know. Maybe we start with like maybe Adolin, because I know he was a big one for you, and he's kind of like off on his own.
Yeah, he's easy to talk about because he doesn't interface with very much else. I liked him. I've liked Adolin a lot since basically book 2, when he has his duel, and then you find out he's a homie and goes into prison with Kaladin. And, you know, I've basically liked him the whole time since then. This was another great book of him just being like, he's a himbo. He cares about people deeply, though. He likes fashion, which is weird. You know, like he's just like an interesting character where he's just like not like many others in the book.
He has a lot of character attributes that are just like his own and not necessarily.
He's a golden retriever of a human who also is like great at dueling and cares deeply about people. And so he's just fun to read. I thought the Towers thing was cool, but it was very strange to be like, I'm playing Towers in the middle of this like life or death 10-day sprint of a siege, you know? So that like didn't quite land for me, but I just like reading him, so I enjoyed his plot.
I liked his, so I did not like his plot as much as you did from our earlier conversations. I know that was one of your more favorites. For me, it pivoted between like, okay, why are we here? Nothing is really happening. You kind of know that like the city's not going to fall in day 3 or something. And there were lots of points of time where like I felt at times like Adolin's struggles were unclear to me. Like he kind of went back and forth around like, yeah, I'm angry at my dad about killing my mom, which totally get it. Hey, that is a reasonable reason to be angry with somebody, but it was never as clear to me in terms of what his issues were. But I did really like his relationship with Yanagan. I thought was really fun, and it was cool to see, you know, through the Adolin POV, like Yanagan, this like random character from like an interlude, you know, way back when,
Book 2 or something.
like really get to develop himself and to see these moments. And one of the things I really liked about Adolin is how much he is like shoving off a lot of the themes that are like so rigid in so many other parts of this book, and it ties in towards the end of the book as well. But I did like his whole like, hey, promises are different than oaths, and I keep my promises type deal.
Like an oath isn't technically honorable to keep in a lot of scenarios, and like, it was cool. And I think his like unoathed was a cool spot to end on, and was built up across enough books that didn't feel like turbo random or anything. I thought it was cool.
I really liked the scene. So maybe we talk about some favorite scenes with each of these POVs. What I really loved the moment when he's fighting the Fuse General or whatever. Abaddon the Destroyer, who's just crazy and is like, I bathe in the blood of radiance. It's like,
That's
okay,
how I stay sane.
yeah, it's like, well, buddy, you found the wrong place, and because this is Adolin, the only non-radiant to their crew. But I was kind of eye-rolly a bit whenever they were sending in like the crippled Adolin who's like hobbling around, and I'm like, this is really what we're gonna do. But it felt so cool when the shard plate like reacted and came to him. I thought that was really well done, and I know you've mentioned some people felt it wasn't telegraphed enough, but I thought that was sick, and just a neat little twist in that moment that I should have seen coming, because there have been clearly signs that he was like bonding and creating this relationship with his plate, which was very much mirror of what we've seen other Radiants do in terms of first they have the Spren, and then they get the plate Spren. But that was a really cool standout moment for me.
Yeah, I thought that was cool. I think the Maya showing up, both of us kind of felt like, obviously she's not just going to bring a bunch of like Nodums, you know, to like suddenly bond.
Yeah, there's not going to be a bunch of Windrunners suddenly popping up in the...
Yeah, so I think both of us thought like Dead Eyes seemed like the most obvious thing.
Especially because they'd referenced like Brandon and some of his other stuff had been like, yep, there's a bunch of lost blades and stuff, and everybody kind of assumed that there would be these somewhere. And so the fact that they referenced it earlier and then she went off and it kept talking about how she's like slowly moving through the beads, and I kept being like, why can't he just... You would have thought that if she was going all the way to lasting integrity and she's like, okay, you guys will come, right? And they're like, yes. Then like Adolin could have been like, cool, now you're back with me. But we had to wait for her to travel all the way back. So it just felt pretty clear to me what was happening.
Yeah, and I think the Towers thing paid off in other storylines. So like I didn't hate it, and you're a big MTG fan, so I'm sure you were like, this is shit.
They're playing Commander.
It was just a little funny to be like, come on.
Yes, I did not feel as strong as you, but I definitely remember like Brandon. There are times in which Brandon wants a scene to happen and will just brute force it into its existence. And that was a moment where he clearly wanted a conversation between Yanagan and people, you know, like this moment where he's not sitting there even while like the sky is falling, and Adolin's always been the type of person who like has to be bullied to going to sleep, and here he's just like, well, I guess there's nothing to do. You guys up for a game of Commander?
There's really nothing to do in a siege.
Yeah, so that I wish that there had been a moment where like a general had like forced him into sitting there or something like that. But
Yeah,
I like that. I liked his relationship with. I liked that we got to experience a lot of the Azish characters in this. I thought the Yanagan's like caretaker was pretty cool and all that stuff. Yeah.
and I guess this is going to apply to a lot of other plot lines, but I like that we got to see more of the world again because it definitely felt after
Rhythm of War, we see like one tower.
And everyone else goes like, they get sent away, and in theory you get to see the world, but it's so brief.
Like interludes and shit like that.
Like
yeah.
interludes, and like Dalnar's like, I'm off in a battle somewhere, and Jasmine's like, I nuked some people, but you never got to feel
You see Irithiru, you see a boat that they're on in Shadesmar, and then you see Lasting Integrity, which is cool, but like massive world, we're really just hanging out in like 2 castles for the most part.
So it was nice to get extended time in Azir. It was nice to get extended time in Shinovar, and get to see those places a little bit more. So that was cool.
Anything else that we want to talk about before we move on to, I think we should probably move on to Sigzil maybe next.
Yeah. The only thing I'll say is Adolin stuck in Azir at the end of this.
Oh yes.
The one place where
The sun is the sun is shining. Yeah, which I was confused about because it was like after a couple months the sun probably suddenly pops out, and I'm like, he got to put the clouds over the top of that for how long? I don't know. It felt more dramatic reasoning than anything else, but
real cool.
Yes, but it was it is cool, and I do like that Azir, who like didn't align themselves with Odium, like gets to hang out in the sun for a little bit, you know.
Yeah, they get to stay independent.
Yeah. All right.
Maybe the weakest of the 3 like Battlefront storylines.
Yes.
For me, just because
I think the weakest of all our character storylines, really.
Yeah, I like Sigzil a lot.
Yes.
For Cosmere reasons we won't talk about in this video, I like Sigzil a lot.
Yes.
I thought there was a cool storyline there with like stepping into Kaladin's shoes and the hole that's left, and am I good enough or not? But it didn't feel particularly deep.
Yeah, it never really came together. It felt like Brandon had to do check-ins every now and then to explain to people every day like what's going on with this, and there's tension and they're trying to battle for it. And the way he was able to do that was like, hey, Sigzil's here. And also Moash randomly spawns at times, like a video game boss.
It's like the Slenderman, like you look for 2 minutes and Moash kills another bridge for and fuck off. Okay.
Yeah. Moash is really like a caricature now, I feel like, after this book.
I also couldn't believe that like he wasn't dealt with in the first 5. I'm like, oh, he's still scaling.
Yeah,
yeah. I guess we're building up for like a super climactic Kaladin versus Moash.
But he's now feels so like insignificant compared to like all the other stakes that are going on. So
yeah, I felt like he should have been wrapped up.
Yes.
Much like Sadius was kind of wrapped
yes.
up. Like you should have. I don't know.
I don't know what the solution would have been, but it was him, and then I guess this is as good enough place as any to talk about L, because both Moash and L at the end of book 4, you're like, oh, like some crazy stuff is going to happen, and obviously like Moash, he gets these like Inquisitor spikes or whatever, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And L, like we get musings of L, we get all this crazy stuff. It really feels as though he like got cut hard in this book or something. Like you feel like if it's like a movie, he's like there must be some L scenes out there that are just gone.
They're on the cutting room floor because you teased him so much in book 4. You get him early in book 5, and he is doing things, but
like picks up the contract at the end and is like, this is pretty clever. Okay, cool. We'll be in touch. And like that's like the most.
Yeah, like I'm sure he'll be important in the back 5 because you see him in the visions of the past and stuff. But I will say this is a broader point, which maybe we'll touch on more. But it felt like there were, because it is in the middle of the series. Of course, you're not going to fire all of your Chekhov guns. Yeah. But I was surprised at how many went unfired in book 5.
Well, so especially ones that were set up very recently, right? Like whenever you're dedicating a post-credit scene to L in book 4, and then he just like doesn't really do anything in book 5, it felt like that feels kind of strange.
Yeah, and that is I guess, well, I'll save it for the Navani plotline. But there's a couple of things in book 4 where I was just like, so it didn't matter for book 5, really, not significantly. And I guess this ties into Moash and the anti-Void Light, like. for how big that was with the Gavilar sphere, with all of book 4 being about making anti-void light or anti-light, you know, and like I thought it was going to have some cataclysmic payoff, and you know, Moash uses it to kill some Spren, but they're like tertiary characters. Spren,
and there's a little bit of tension in the Shallan stuff, which we'll get to, but like, yeah, to your point, like we spent. Maybe this is as good a time as we need to talk about it. I don't know if we have anything else to talk about on the Sigil side.
No, the Sigil is just like, I like his character. Yeah. He's all like a little insecure about his position, but all that happened was like a couple times him and Drahe were like, damn Kaladin. Anyways, back to this.
It felt like his character development was like kind of waste. To what point, you know? Like, I don't know. It just felt.
It felt like you had to do the check-ins. Yes. I thought his plan was cool with like the fail-safes, but like again, it was kind of like, you know, it's not going to go terribly wrong.
What we should talk about his relevance to the end though.
Yeah, we should, before we go tangent into anti-void light.
Super cool that. Look, I guess there's no better way to say this other than like, you'll see Sigil again in other books if you haven't read the other books yet, and it is really cool to see the Dawn Shard moment.
Yeah, him getting the Dawn Shard was sick, as well as the other Dawn Shard moment. I don't know where else to talk about it, but when Risen and Hoyd like merged together or something crazy, like just all that was cool.
It's neat to see him like on his way out of town, and like they're like, oh yeah, Spren can now leave now, and all. It's just like some really interesting stuff there. So like it felt like the best parts of his storyline happened basically after his stuff was wrapped, you know, like.
And the conclusion they came to, where they like give the land over to the listeners, that was cool, but it was so obvious that was what was going to happen as soon as they're like, we need to contact Yasna, which I think was like day 8 even maybe.
Well, let's talk about Venli, and then we'll talk about Navani.
That's the Venli stuff. I'm just saying, like, that's how his like battlefront concluded, and it was very obvious what was going to happen, so it didn't feel very climactic.
So let's talk Venli, then we'll get to Navani and the Void Light stuff, because I think Venli is kind of relevant a little bit tangentially to all this stuff.
Yeah, they all kind of connect,
especially because she's like such a Rhythm of War character. So okay, so Venli, I was pretty interested in what was happening with her, and then kind of, I don't want to say disappointed, but like I was fine with what happened to her, but it felt like also nothing really happens at the end. Like she clearly becomes like a leader within her people. You get, I think honestly, I'm a little bit disappointed that in the Venli chapters we didn't get to see more of Flying Fused Lady.
Leshwi.
Yeah. Because Leshwi, in some ways, I feel like it's even kind of a cooler character than Venli.
Yeah.
But I think, I don't know how to put it, but there was a lot of hype, but then just like kind of, it didn't build to anything. Like she goes in and discovers the fucking pool.
Yeah, you find Odin's
perpendicularity
pool thing.
And you find that in like day 7 or something. I think like.
No, it's a little later.
Is it a little later? Maybe day 8. Like it's still like only 2/3 of the way into the book, and you feel like it's going to be, for at least that's how I remember it, and you feel like it's going to be like relevant to the end, and it's just not relevant.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of one of those Chekhov guns I'm talking about, where like Venli so far has seemed very unimportant. I think she was most important maybe in actually Oathbringer, and then she gets her flashback book in Rhythm of War, which felt like Esh and I we already knew all this. Yeah. And then in this book, she's just like, here we are as listeners walking through the chasms for the whole book. And then we
get chasm feeds again.
Like things have happened. They've now like, the plot has advanced. There's now chasm feeds in their army. They find the thing, but they do nothing with it. And they just like accept the contract at the end. And they're like, we own this land now.
Yeah, it's a bit disappointing because I think oftentimes in these storylines, Brandon will reveal something cool or something cool will happen. And you often hope that because of like the Sanderlanche term, right, where everything like converges at the end in this big epic moment, you're like, oh, how is this going to play into that? But sometimes he's just revealing something because he's like, this will be relevant in 15 years of your life.
Yeah. I guess that's just more, it's like, because there was also, which is, I don't want to get too far into this, but there's like the fourth moon, the Natanitan seems important. There's clearly more going on here. And I was so hungry for the details of like, oh, the shard pool is also here? Like, what is happening? And she just uncovers the dirt. She goes, there's the shard pool, covers it back up. And you're just like, what the hell?
Yeah.
And it's still Retribution shard pool, so it's still going to be relevant, but it is, we don't know how it's relevant.
Yeah, and so it felt like there was less, I would have liked to have seen some sort of acknowledgement of the end. Like, even if Elle had looked at Venli and been like, well, now that you've got the crazy pool, I guess we're going to figure something, like, just something that more even hints at like the relevance of this like big moment, and it just so that kind of fell flat. And so Venli continues to be, sadly, because I would like to like her, but one of the weakest characters in my opinion in the series.
In theory, the position of the listeners is one of the coolest factions that exists, but they just seem to never have anything to do.
I do like shout out to the sort of like there's a lot of things that I think Brandon did a good job of like coming full circle with this book. And one of them is like you open the first book with the assassination, and then we're mid-war between the humans and the listeners, and specifically like the Alethi.
Yeah.
And then this, like the document is like, this is a peace treaty between, now we're allied. You know, like it does a good job of like closing that sort of chapter from the very beginning.
He does talk about his brackets, and even the very ending bracket of it kind of being a reverse Arahatiem, where they redo the other thing.
We'll talk about it, yeah. But yeah, that's one of the things that's up there.
Yeah.
Okay. So, how much did you like all that Navani stuff?
Dude, Navani was a barnacle. She just hung on to Dalinar this whole.
She was a babysitter.
Held on to her. She was a babysitter.
Yeah.
She like helped him reason through some things.
Yeah.
And she was like a gremlin in the tower for the first like couple days before they all got boomed into the spiritual realm.
Yeah.
But on this point of things that like you saw in a book that didn't immediately pay off in the next one, which it's a
trend, I think, especially with Oathbringer, because you see this with Dalinar and Oathbringer, where like Rhythm of War, he's just like out.
Yeah, and I get it does make sense where like you get a whole book around this character, they come to some big realization, some big power up, and then Brandon kind of sidelines them because you just had a whole book of them.
Yeah.
But it also
unless you're Kaladin, in which case you get to always power up.
Yeah, which is cool, but I can see why he does it, because you don't want to like keep doubling down, but it also has this other effect where you're like, but I just saw why that character should be relevant.
Yeah. Especially because she made a like Cosmere level discovery, right? Yeah. Like we learned something that is relevant to basically every world in the Cosmere, which is you can create this like anti-investiture.
Yeah.
And that, as we kind of alluded to earlier, was just almost entirely absent from this. You know, it did build some tension. I will say, like, I remember consciously becoming aware of the fact that I felt more tense in the like Moash scenes because of the fact that like Brandon talks a little bit about how like when you just have characters that become immortal or can like mega heal from any wound, you lose a lot of tension in these scenes because there's not a ton of risk for them. But the fact that like Moash is just able to like jump up and like kill a spren or whatever is like pretty intense. But like that was really only in those scenes for a couple moments.
Yeah, and there's like a little bit with the
Shallan stuff, yeah.
But just on the anti-void light point, like even when Shallan got stabbed with it the first time, and then it's fine. Yeah. Like, kind of immediately disarmed the danger of it, where I was like, oh, you can, as a Radiant, you can get stabbed and be okay, as long as you don't breathe in Stormlight. Like, it makes sense, but it also, for a weapon that was teased, again, from the first book with the weird orb in Gavilar's hand, a whole book of Navani discovering how to make it, doesn't seem that threatening in this immediate follow-up book. And then Navani, with the tower, does nothing. Her Fabrials don't really do anything. Fabrials are just not relevant in this book. Like, there's so much from book 4 that's just not immediately relevant for what was already a weak book. It doesn't feel like the payoffs.
It felt like there should have, like, I had anticipated that there'd be like a nuke dropped in this book or something, like an anti-investiture nuke or something.
Blow up a shard or something crazy.
Yeah.
And maybe that'll come in the future. Again, it's an unfired Chekhov gun to me still, but it,
it's just like if obviously the Stormfather does end up going away, but if the Stormfather had just been killed in this by like anti-investiture or something, like that would have been
just like
So I liked what they did with Rhythm of War with the science stuff. It got a little bit more cocaine for me, but it's just like a bummer that nothing really came out of it. And yeah, Navani is pretty irrelevant in this book, in almost every scene that she's in, which is like, again, Dalinar's pretty similar, but at least Dalinar's like off at war, you know. Navani's just big chillin'. Yeah. So, okay, we had Yasna.
Yasna, finish out the battlefronts, I guess.
Yeah.
Yasna, I don't know what to say about this.
Here's what I'll say. This is the most character development I think we have ever had Yasna get in like maybe if you combine all 4 books, it is still great.
Been a bit of an emotional brick wall.
Yeah.
And so I will say the Hoyd romance didn't seem to go anywhere.
Yeah. I honestly liked that it fizzled out because it felt a little more realistic than it would.
Yeah, so that I actually kind of struggled with it for that reason, because I was like, oh, it didn't go anywhere. But I'm like, well, that's kind of like...
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of my take on it, and I like that it adds a little bit to both Yasna and Hoyd's or Wit's
Yeah, that they're not
characterization.
like robots, that they have actual needs.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I liked that, and I in the past Yasna's just been this like stoic. I'm like this badass. And I liked that this book kind of brought her to her knees in a way that, like, there's a moment where Taravangian is like, oh, I'm going to teach them that they're both wrong. And we'll talk about Dalinar later, but I don't feel like he ever truly gets that moment with Dalinar, but he definitely gets that moment with Yasna. And I love that we basically get, because we spent 4 books with her being this like super self-confident, self-assured, like, maybe in Rhythm of War you get a flashback or interlude where she's like on the battlefield and she's like whatever, but like she's so sure of herself at the very least.
Yeah.
This felt really exciting for me as somebody who is like vaguely interested in the character to see like a really big moment like this.
And you pointed this out when we were talking as we were reading, that like the way that he is depicting atheism doesn't feel like a caricature. The fact that she's not like, fuck religion, I hate religion, religion sucks. She also doesn't like any institution that is like, in her eyes, doing what religion does about doctrine and dogma and all these sorts of things. And so,
no, I mean, not to make it too personal, but like, look, I somewhat am impressed with Brandon, who is a very open public Mormon, that he is able to create a story, a character that is so clearly antithetical to his like own personal beliefs, and I feel like portray her in like a really cool way.
Yeah. So I agree with all that. I think she needed to lose somewhere in this first half, so it made sense. I even think this is probably not much happened in her thing until the debate. They basically got faked out that it wasn't a actual assault, which is like, it was fine. And we didn't spend much time there, so it didn't really drag. But it all built up to this debate.
Yes.
And it both worked and didn't work for me.
So I like the debate a lot, but I know you should dive into it.
Well, why don't you give your positive before I poop on it?
So I liked the debate a lot because I felt like it was cool, one, to revisit a lot of the conversations that had existed previously in other books around like what is right and what is wrong and the greater good and all this type of stuff. I liked that we had in a book that is filled with a lot of very dramatic moments for crazy reasons of people putting out oaths that are above their ideal and all this type of stuff, and big revelations. I like that we also had this kind of like moment where a character gets crushed just in a conversation.
Yep.
Kind of akin to like a court drama or something like that, right?
Yeah, not everything can be a giant battle, or not everything should be a giant battle.
Yes, and I like that it also keeps our villain very grounded in like a human form in a way that I think sometimes some of Brandon's characters
get sucked up into the spiritual realm and lectured by God.
Yeah. So I thought that all of that was pretty cool, and I felt like it was neat to see how, like, you knew that, for me at least, it was very clear that Fen was going to turn by the way that they were setting it up. Like, you just sometimes you can see where a story's heading, because it's like you don't just build out the story and then like have
and then they win and it's fine. Yeah.
So but I think the way they got there was pretty cool. So I enjoyed it a lot, and I really enjoyed, as I said before, just getting to see Yasna humbled, because even though I like her as a character, it felt something much more interesting for her than we'd seen previously, and the way she gets humbled with shit from like the first couple books is super cool.
Yeah, so that is the part that I agree with. In terms, you basically said everything I agree with, which is, the fact that her own actions kind of betrayed the fact that she doesn't really live by her own philosophy as much as she wants to,
and doesn't even believe her own philosophy as much as she wants to.
Right, and I think I saw people like arguing that it's dumb that Fen switched sides, but basically, from my interpretation, Taravangian basically got her to admit that she doesn't really adhere to her greatest good philosophy, and she prioritizes her family, and because
her kingdom,
and because Fen trusts Yasna so much, once Yasna is forced to admit that she is prioritizing not the greater good, but herself and her interests, then Fen should do the same.
And I like that there's that moment where like Fen is like, they always think she's like a hard ass, but then she's like, oh, I wouldn't do that. And Yasna's like, oh, shoot. And Fen's like, yeah, I would probably pretend that I was going to, but then I wouldn't actually do it.
Yeah, and so that's also why she should listen to Yasna, because Yasna will do what's always best for her people, which is what's kind of proven out through her actions by bringing up all the things in the past. So I thought all that was cool. I thought the character assassination that he tried to do on Yasna was fine. It was just the first half of the debate, which was much more philosophically minded.
Yeah.
It was just so paper thin and like elementary. You know, it's just like not an interesting conversation to read. It was like I think I messaged you baby's first ethics class, you know, and it.
I mean, that was the scene that pulled me out of the Kaladin nail fight, so I get that.
It just, I guess because of the stakes. It's like God versus a very like educated woman, and it just didn't feel like a deeper level was reached, you know. And it's a fantasy book. It's not like supposed to be super deep, so it's just the stakes and how much it was hyped up to have the first half of it kind of be like wasted in a sense on like this pop philosophy that wasn't super deep anyway.
I didn't have an issue with it because I feel like a lot of his stuff is sort of like pop science, pop philosophy, pop whatever, you know. So it was in line for me, but I get how you like if you are really invested for like a battle of the wits between these two characters, and you're like, I've seen this on like a entry-level YouTube course for philosophy. Then
it's exactly that. It's like promise versus payoff, which is Brandon talks about. It's like it's a big promise to be like God and this very smart woman are going to debate, and then you get a kind of meh debate, and it ends with a character assassination, which works plot-wise. But
I think we only have Kaladin / Seth and Dalinar left.
Yeah. We have Shallan.
Oh, we have Shallan. That's right. I guess we should do Kaladin and Seth, then Shallan, then Dalinar, because Shallan's kind of tied into the
heralds and
So we've got Kaladin and Zeth.
I was overall a pretty big fan of this. I thought it definitely, like a lot of them, you kind of like do a couple too many check-ins at different times, and because this one was so mental health oriented, that was where it kind of bumped in the most to me with some of those complaints I had at the beginning.
Yeah, because Kaladin's always like, I have to heal, like Ishar and
Like the mental soldiers, I actually think is a better way to write it because like
yes, that is in line with the way stuff is represented or whatever. And Zeth that starts to become like, I will prepare my mental soldiers, and it just feels very much. You know, you would not expect maybe a therapist did consult him unless I'm wrong, but like it does not feel like something you would read on Twitter today to see people being like, I've prepared my mental soldiers for war.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think the whole like the three things, you're not a thing, you can choose, and like all those worked for me. It was just some of the other times it didn't. So overall, I did like the plot line. I love the flashbacks. I really liked getting to learn Shinovar and his backstory because it was a little different than I had assumed it was going to be.
Yeah, I was mixed on the flashbacks. I think there were a lot of times where I was kind of bored with them, but I did like the fact that it turned, like there was, I would have never expected to have led like a revolution in his nation.
I'm
like,
starting civil war.
Or it's like, oh, I thought you just like mouthed off to the
person. You know?
I liked his relationship with his dad a lot too. Like that was
dad
something that I was not something I expected, but I thought that was like really cool. I enjoyed like the strife with his family. Like it just felt very, very different than I think a lot of the ways that we've seen families portrayed in this book previously, where most of the families are like fucked up in some way, but like this felt really unique in that like because through no fault of his own, he caused this like big issue for his family. We got to see the ramifications.
Yeah, it felt very grounded in a series that has sometimes become a little ungrounded.
Yes, and it was cool to see through the flash or the spirit realm stuff, but also through this like what Shinovar is like, and to see Kaladin reacting to like grass and stuff like that, things that are so normal to us. The only thing it did feel a little bit like was that it felt a little like Pokemon Gym. We got to get to the next monastery to fight the Pokemon Gym trainer from there.
Combined with the voice being like trying to be really mysterious, but it felt kind of obvious where that was going, and
especially by like the halfway point of the book.
Yeah, like the beginning, I was very intrigued. Like, what is the voice? And then it was clearly not an unmade because that was too obvious.
Yeah. By the time you get to Zeth finally going to confront the voice, it felt. I mean, I understood why, because you didn't want to like keep it mysterious, but then like it was weird that to the reader, it became very obvious that it was Ishar, at least to me, because you see like the Spren, which is a callback to Rhythm of War. But everybody else, especially Zeth, is sitting there like having to keep this illusion. So you're sort of sitting there like, yep, when are you gonna figure it out? Yep, when are you gonna figure it out?
Yeah, it's like the wrong kind of dramatic irony. Yeah. So that part was a little meh. I liked the voice in the beginning, and then it kind of dragged a little too much. I liked Nail showing up. I liked Ishar showing up. It was kind of unpredictable who was going to show up in their plot.
Yeah. Who's cameo appearance today? In day 6, we've got a cameo from Nail.
Nightblood was
Dude, the Nightblood stuff was great.
I love Nightblood, so like all that worked for me, and I thought the Spren was
the twist with the Spren being, because for so many books we'd thought of these Sprens, and I had started to just be like, wow, I don't know how I could possibly like Skybreakers because their Spren just seem like jerks, you know. and so the moment whenever he the throwing a what it was, a fork or a spoon, yeah.
Once you realize how useless he is, and Seth's like, bro, you can't put the illusion back on, like the baby's out or whatever, whatever's out of the basket.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. What did you think of his ending where we see him skip an oath?
Oh boy. All right.
Oh wait, you haven't told me. I feel like this is a reaction.
We talked about this. I thought him skipping an oath was cool.
Okay.
I thought it was really lame how he literally did nothing with it and then like renounced his oaths. And there was a lot of oath renouncing, which is very thematic with honor and Adolin and this. But they began to like lose their punch. Yeah. And this one in particular just felt so random.
Because it's like this big moment, and like Kaladin turns to Scylla and is like, can you do that? And she's like, I guess you can. And then he's immediately like, man, I'm out.
Yeah, and he doesn't use his power to like win the fight and then renounce it, or like it just felt like it happened to happen. Yeah. And it didn't go anywhere. And there were a number of people who said their 5th oath and then didn't do anything with it, particularly, you know, like it's like, what do you get with the 5th power? Well, and I guess that's for the back half or something to explore. But
and it feels really cool when in these books, when you see a character like Brandon has done a very good job of intrinsically tying a character progression moment to like a power level moment, right? As just as an artifact of this magic system, where like we've waited so long for Zeth, especially in this book, to realize like, hey, you don't always need to look to somebody else as your guide. Like sometimes you can figure out morality, or you can try to figure this stuff out on your own. We finally see him in this moment. He swears it as an oath, which is like, yes, he's discovered it. But then in saying immediately, I renounce my oaths, which I guess he doesn't say. He says like, I release my Spren. Because Skybreakers can, it's like they can do this without having it harm to the Spren or whatever. I don't know. I get why that felt kind of a bummer, but I did like it as an interesting twist. Now I'm like, I want to get Zeth back to the power level that he was at. Like, it felt really cool to see him make this level of progression. So
yeah, it was cool. He said he was going to find the other Skybreakers who don't follow
Nail
or whatever.
I kept going back and forth between, it was very obvious to me that Kaladin was always going to become a herald. And I guess now we can kind of get into his stuff because it's kind of tied together, right? But like, for a while I was like, is Zeth also going to become a herald? I had this fear that like, there's a line, which I don't know why it's in there, where Ishar says something about how like, oh yeah, we can make another honor blade. We just need a piece of honor. And I was like, where could they get a piece of honor? Oh, Syl is a piece of honor. Like, I wonder if like that would be a horrific way for this to be. But if you're a book 5, like, you know, Ishar turning Syl into like an honor blade or something would be crazy. So I had a lot of anticipation for this, and then it did feel not bad, but certainly not a twist to have it be like, and now Kaladin's going to take the spot of the other Windrunner, who was the only one that was dead.
Yeah, that was the only other thing Anti-Void did was officially kill.
And you and I have gone back and forth a little bit on this, because like for me, I'm like, it felt like the previous books, they had been like Jezreel is 100% dead, and like getting captured into a gem is like essentially killing a herald. But it did like, at the very least, it, as you said, officially killed him, which is, I think, basically the language that L uses in his one scene.
No, I think the Kaladin stuff, like you said, I was wondering where he was going to go, especially after the day one. Like, all of day one was just Kaladin saying goodbye to literally every person he met this series. And I think, like, if that was supposed to be a misdirect, it kind of fell flat, because unless he died, it wasn't going to be paid off, or like something, you know? And to turn to a herald, you're like, well, he's going to come back now and see all these people.
Yeah, but okay. I do agree that there was too much goodbying. I do think that it is a reasonable thing to be like, okay, Kaladin's out of the picture, you know?
Yeah, but he's not going to be out. He's going to be in the back five a bunch.
It would feel worse if the Dalinar stuff, which we'll get to, had...
That is why it feels particularly bad.
because it felt weird. It felt like a lot of day one was this, like, we have to go to everybody, like it's a video game quest to say goodbye to everybody.
Yeah, it's like before you leave the village, say bye to your mom.
But yeah, I think in light of how other characters end, it feels a little unneeded.
And so, anyways, I think him becoming a herald is cool. I think his Kaladin's progression of being like, you know, what do I really want? I actually do want to protect people. Something I need to do. It's what I want to do within reason. And so he will become a herald. Like, I thought all that stuff was pretty.
It was nice to see him in this, and especially in his final moment, I think is the clearest part of it. He is like overcome, even if it's not completely gone, he has learned to overcome his like depression and the things that hold him back. And it felt cool to see in the many moments him be like, hey, this is still part of who I am, but I can rise above it, you know?
Him getting up anyways after being like, you're trying to give me depression, Ishar? Yeah. I've had depression.
I'm the king of depression.
Him being like, this pain, this darkness, I can stand up through it. Like, I thought that was a cool payoff. Probably one of the few parts of the book that like got me on an emotional level where I was like, let's go. You've been kind of encroaching on me. I didn't know how to say like, fair. Bro, stop rolling up to me.
No, that's fine. I'm getting more and more excited.
I'm like, I keep leaning away. I liked all that. I think all that worked pretty well for me. Him becoming a herald was cool. Refounding the Oath Pact was cool.
I liked the battle. Well, okay. Whatever.
I can talk about nails.
Battle?
Yes, I liked. I liked a lot of stuff, including I think his interactions with Nail. Though you have somewhat in our discussions. This is maybe we should record these before we have conversation. You somewhat swayed me into the idea that like his flute battle is a little goofy.
I think it's just hard to picture. You know, I think that's like I try to envision things. I don't have a very good mental ability to visualize things. Yeah. So the idea that he uses the tones of Roshar to make Nail temporarily lucid, that works for me. I'm not criticizing that. It's just the idea that he was like hopping around, and the initial first half of the fight was cool too, where he got Nail to tap speed or whatever the fuck that was. Like the first half was cool, but then he just starts like dancing around and playing his flute and telling a story, and then when he throws his arms out and the wind gushes past him and like you know, like
it's very when he does that. I just imagine the Tony Stark meme of the missiles going off behind him.
Instead it's wind and Nail's like having a breakdown. Like it just got a little goofy sounding where he's like, "What's in the tower, Nail?"
Yeah.
Nothing's in the tower.
Yeah. I thought that. I still thought that kind of moment was cool. To your point actually about the therapy stuff, it's like it's weird that there's a lot of moments that feel so conventional therapy, and I'm like, oh, this is also a weird version of like I don't know if a therapist would be like, yeah, you know what you should do? You should torture a character with like memories of their past in order to get them to like come back. But obviously his like mental state is supernatural or whatever. But but I still thought his like whole relationship with like the wind was cool.
Yep.
Though maybe just a nice time for us to do the tangent on. It was weird that like I do think there's Brandon run. I don't think he's gotten there yet, but Brandon I feel like does run the risk in a 10-book long series of always introducing brand new concepts we've never heard of, and we kind of got a little bit of that last book with like now we've got anti-light, but we also have like tower light, but we also have all these different things. Now, from another concept, we've now added a bunch of gods. So like Badu and Mishram was basically a god. We kind of already had that, but now there are like gods that existed, demigods that existed on Roshar before Aiden Alcium in night, stone, and wind, right? Yeah.
So I was doing one of my deep dives on Reddit, and someone did point out that in the Elias Steel, or whatever it's called, from book 3, whatever, the thing that revealed that the humans were the Dawn Shards, they did mention stone and night in there. Yeah. And wind has always kind of been around Kaladin, so they've always kind of been there.
The wind was his.
Yeah, but it did very much suddenly become like, no, now it's a thing in book 5.
Like, now it is a literal thing that speaks.
Yeah, so the stone's always been there with stones unhallowed and the Shin. Like, there's always been things, but now they became a thing. And I think to that point, it's like, You have so many heralds. You have the 10 Knights Radiant, where we haven't even met half the orders yet. Like in a very
We have not had like POV.
yeah. Then you have the 9 Unmade. You have all the fuse, different kinds. You have the different regal storm forms.
3 gods. You have these other gods. You had Ba-Mishram, and like you have like the Night Watcher and all these things that are kind of like avatars of the gods. And
Yeah, and it's like we haven't even fully explored any of these topics yet. And I feel like the mental weight, and then there's the whole Cosmere on top of it. So, not that it's bad, but it's definitely.
But not to your point. Not that it's bad, but I worry that if we keep, I really hope that we get a break for a little bit behind releasing brand new magic systems or brand new deities or brand new brands of powered people things.
There's listeners, singers, fused, regals, unmade, magic systems, different kinds of light, and you're just like, oh.
Yeah, we need less nouns.
They all have different names too. He has like 3 names for each class.
Yeah. So like, look, you and I will go deep. Like you told me beforehand that you were reading like the wiki and all that stuff, and I obviously listened to 17th Shard podcast and all that stuff. But like, I am kind of like, Brandon, we need to chill on like I had this conversation. I don't know if it was in our Rhythm of War video, but I was kind of like, I'm a little worried that now we've got tones and light and stone and we've got anti-lights and like
God metal.
I understand all of it, and it's very exciting to me. But I'm also the type of person, like you and I are like video game people. We will dive deep into like mechanics to try to learn like metas of stuff, right? Like the average person is not, some of the stuff can be overwhelming.
Yeah, I don't know how people feel about it, but I don't necessarily dislike it.
I don't dislike it either, but it is kind of, it was surprising.
Yeah. Okay. Back to Kaladin. Ishar's cool as fuck. I think Ishar is one of my, like, low-key became one of my most, I don't know about favorite, but most interesting people, where he, like, knows more than Tanavast about some things. He's like, Tanavast is checking his plans with Ishar, not the other way around, or like they're talking to each other. He got his powers I didn't know that the Heralds basically became supercharged even before Ashen blew up.
Yeah, we knew that they had access to surges, but yeah, it was interesting that you learned that like Ishar like could just do all the stuff.
Yeah, he could do all the stuff, and like they were aging slowly already, and he's the one who's like, what about this Oath Pact thing? Like, what if we do that? And it wasn't Heralds.
He's constantly like the one that's suggesting stuff to Tanavast. So.
Yeah, he's the one who's like, and then I picked up Odium's power for a little bit.
You and I had opposite reactions to the Kaladin Ishar interaction at the end. I thought that was really cool. I thought it was so badass because up until this moment, you're like, okay, I guess Kaladin's gonna have to do like what he did with Nail, or like, and Wit as a character has been this all-knowing character. It's similar a little bit to like at the end of Rhythm of War when you see Odium like fuck with Wit, and you're like, oh no, like he's supposed to be like off limits. He's supposed to be so pristine. And then in this, like Kaladin goes up, he tries all the stuff, and like you have all these like stories that even as a reader I had been like, oh, I'm really invested in like all these different things. We have like, oh, I guess it went to sleep just now, but like the fleet stories on I think this monitor. And then you just have Ishar be like, nah, dog, all that stuff was a fucking scam.
I wrote one of those.
Yeah, I got those copy pasta chain letters from Wit in my inbox. Yeah. I already know what's going on, and it felt very. It really, 1, made Ishar interesting to me, 2, heightened the tension in that moment, and 3, just added a lot of like, it's neat whenever. You and I talked about a little bit, I used this description that like Brandon at times can feel a little Disney movie in terms of just like, obviously you get like sick badass moments, but there are also moments where are just like the Nail flute scene with, and so it was neat that this was a moment where Ishar is just like, listen, I don't do that Disney Channel shit, okay?
Busy.
The adults are here trying to win a war.
Yeah. No, I didn't mind that. It's just, it felt very much like destroyed with facts and logic. Yeah. Kaladin trying his beta cuck, like, I don't know, you know what I mean? It was just so easy. Like, it was almost comical when it shouldn't have been.
Yeah. I was in on, I think that's one of those things where like, the line is probably between cringe and sick is so thin that like some people just fall on one side of the line or the other, and you and I split on that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think mine's objectively right or anything.
So Kaladin, we talked about everything other than Kaladin gets the beach episode.
Hey.
Like, dude, I love that they're on a.
We didn't talk about him and Syl. You gonna ship them long term?
Oh, I mean, dude, it was very strange. So for those that don't know, I was made aware through the 17th Shard community that there's people that are Silladin fans, and they ship Kaladin and Syl together as like a romantic pairing. And I thought, and now, honestly, it's thinking about it now, I'm almost more convinced that it's what's going to happen.
Oh, because he's dead now.
Well, because Brandon has in day one, there are consistent scenes where Syl is like, where it's claimed that Syl was never a child, she was always a woman, and now she's like walking around in adult size form.
She's got a vagina.
Yeah. So I was gonna get into that, but yeah, there's like a weird joke scene about her reproductive organs, and I was pretty convinced that like in the book that would end up becoming relevant in some way. Like maybe there'd be like romantic scenes between him and her in Shinovar or something. Now I'm even more convinced, even though that never happened, because I'm like, why would you just randomly add all this shit in the beginning of the book?
Why do you have a dance scene?
Yes. And it felt like the reason why he would do that is because you maybe have read online that everybody's like, Silladin fans are cringe because like she's like a child, and Brandon has to get in there and be like, by the way, she was never a child, she's an adult, and like it would be perfectly fine for her to be involved with somebody.
I thought it was weird in this book because I thought it was going to happen in this book. Yeah. I think that he's building up to it more and more, and the fact that Kaladin's now investiture technically as well. It's still like a little hand wavy and weird. Sure. But assuming this doesn't really hit until like book 8, by that point I won't care.
But it feels so. It feels like, honestly, it feels like he had to go in there.
Yeah, he had to lay more groundwork.
Yes.
It was like too weird.
He had to like, not retcon, but like clarify a lot of other previous things he had said previously.
Yeah, it's...
but the beach episode. So, dude, I find it so funny. There's a lot of things I think that are kind of funny about the ending. Not even necessarily bad, but just like ironic. So like the whole thing is like everybody gets tortured, and becoming a herald means you have to become tortured. And then Ashar's like, guys, I figured it out. We just go to the beach instead, and then we don't have to get tortured.
Guys, what if we just like didn't?
Yes. And so he's gonna go and just become a therapist for 80 years for these people. We figured out that's how the time dilation works. Because in the last chapter, he references that it's like some long period.
Yeah, because I think what it is they're technically on Braze, so they're outside the reach of the Roshar time dilation. So it's going to be 80 years on Braze, which will give them...
while years pass there, months will pass for us. Okay.
Or I guess they will go slower than their bodies are getting tortured. I don't know.
Yeah.
Whatever.
So he's just got a lot of time to like...
Fix them.
To therapize everyone. He's going to be sitting there with Freud being like, so Ashar, what's your relationship with your mother? He's discovering therapy. He's going to get some things wrong.
He's going to do the Freud thing.
Yeah.
Like, so drugs and sex.
Yes. Now it seems you have some envy of your father.
No, I mean it's cool. I think it's fine. I have no problem with it. I think the only thing that you pointed this out, which was weird, is it was like the whole you need a shard of honor to make a shard blade or a honor blade, and it's not quite clear where that came from. Yeah. And there's definitely it's things that I think he will pay off in the future, where you really deep dive into the Oath Pact. But a lot of the Oath Pact stuff felt pretty hand-wavy. Yeah. Where it's like, Videl has a secret thing for immortality. We'll figure that out later. Yeah. And the Oath Pact is made by this like agreement because you guys were touched by odium initially, so it's fine. Like,
but we also don't really know what form the torture took on Braze. Because it's like, do they go find the herald's bodies and they're just all comatose, and then they're just sitting there like poking them with knives and stuff, and like the bodies are doing nothing, and they're like, damn it. They're at the beach. We can't get them. Like it's not. There are a lot of questions. I don't think it's necessarily bad, but it is very funny to me that like all the perks, none of the pain of being a herald now.
Yeah, and even like all the Spren are saved because we remade the Oath Pact, and you're like,
also, why would they ever break? Well, I guess the idea is that now that slave will slowly return.
It's that they're going to return when they're ready. Yeah. So they're going to break when it's time to break.
Yeah.
But I mean, the whole thing about like, oh, we need to refound the oath pact to save the Spren.
Yes.
It's like, you can say that, but I don't understand why that's true.
How does the oath pact stop? Like it presumably keeps like honors investiture and cultivation's investiture like protected, even though only honors investiture would go into this thing. Cultivation left, yeah. So I guess
it's unclear. There's a number of things which are not criticisms yet because there's 5 more books to clarify. It just feels bad right now knowing we won't get any answers, at least for 10 years.
Raise a lot of questions, which will be good to theorize for 10 years on. So we are starting to run out of battery. So really quickly, before we get Shallan, any of these side characters that we thought were cool? I guess we could see...
I was going to talk about Talon with Shallan because it ties into her reveal.
Okay. I don't know if there's anything else. I guess Rissyn is now figuring out her
Rissyn's
stuff.
cool. I always like seeing Rissyn check things, especially after John Shard.
All right, Shallan.
Shallan.
And I guess that's also Relaine and Renarin.
Yeah,
because they were actually
just everyone in the
yeah,
spiritual realm who's not Galvanar.
Yeah, and Navani and, and Gav. What's to say? I didn't dislike Shallan's chapters, but I don't feel strongly about what happened with her after this.
She's been a character who I've generally disliked throughout the series. Like, her humor doesn't land for me. I find her annoying.
Was that even the case in the last book?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. I don't really like her. Okay. I didn't mind her that much this book, which is a positive. It's an improvement. But the whole point about, like, you know, getting stabbed by the void light suddenly, or the anti-light, it's not that dangerous if you're just smart about it. I thought her wanting to save Bao out on Mistram, or she wanted to stop them from getting there while Relaine and Renarin wanted to find her for their own reasons. Like, it all tied together well. I know you thought it was kind of hand-wavy that they're all in the spiritual realm because they threw a bomb.
Yeah, oh yes. Actually, thank you for reminding me of that because I had forgotten about it. But it's very convenient, like almost sitcom-esque, that like we get Mraize and Eatel and Renarin and Relaine and Shallan and Gav all happen to all show up at the, and like I know that like Mraize and Eatel are trying to go, but it just happens so quick that it's almost kind of knee-jerky. Like they're just like, we're just gonna hop on the boat and quickly get over to like Daladar before he...
And it was super obvious that, like, you shouldn't trust those guards, Shallan. Like, you know they can, like, infiltrations.
Yeah, so like, that scene felt weird, and especially the Gav stuff, which we'll talk about. It just felt like it Brandon, I think, often has these cool moments where, like, everything comes together in a really cool way. I would say this is the opposite of that in terms of them all getting pulled in the spiritual.
They all need to be in here.
Yeah. So we're just gonna like lift. Okay, Gav falls lift. It's just, I don't know. It just, to me, it felt a little contrived. But okay. Anyway, in the spirit realm, I think part of the reason why the Shallan, Renarin, and Relaine stuff doesn't hit me very hard is because like not a lot happens. Like, they're basically just trying to always figure out what's going on with Body Mishram. We get some cool Body Mishram facts, but they're really just in a holding pattern until like day 10.
Yeah, I think much like kind of some of the other Battlefronts and stuff, they're like, they are doing things. They kind of clash a couple times, but nothing's super happening. And a lot of them have kind of reached their climaxes already of like character growth. Yes. Like Formless has already been dealt with, so you have like this bit of like, why is Formless still here? Yeah. But there's no like...
Like the second time Formless showed up, I was like, that's a Yachtl, because we aren't seeing her anywhere.
Yeah, it was either Gav or Formless. You called it right. Yeah. I thought the only parts so just to skip all the recapping, I liked the reveal of the wedding scene with the mother and that moment where Shannara shows up and they have a thing.
Yes, and we need the love of a human and a singer to bring it all back together.
Well, that's with...
Oh, you're talking about the other...
I'm talking about at the wedding.
Yes, sorry. I thought you were talking about the other love-based scene. Yes, the Channa scene where, like, she goes back to her wedding and Channa's there. I thought it was super cool, as you were just saying, that it ended up being actual Channa. Yeah. That was a really, really cool twist. Really neat, and I thought it worked really, really well for me.
Yeah, I think the two things about this that I didn't like, which will tie into Talon, one, it was pretty obvious that Shauna was her mother, so that part was not going to be like a big reveal.
That was for those that don't know, that was like a very, very strong theory.
It was very popular in the fan community, and I even started with the whole red hair and who's your mother and all these sorts of things. That became pretty obvious pretty early, so it was never going to be like this moment reveal. Yeah. But the thing that was cool was that Talon never broke because Channa died on the night of Gavilar, and that's why someone's like, a herald has died tonight, and she breaks pretty much immediately, which is why everything kicks off. Yeah. And that's why Shallan's like, oh, I killed my mother and doomed the world. Yeah. It's like, oh, very literally, yes. But in a word of Brandon, like, almost feels like 5 years ago, he confirmed Tall never broke.
Oh, it's interesting. Sounds like you don't like spoilers, Mark.
Well, so
like you're pretty anti-spoiler.
I think I don't care if someone spoils something that's not like a big beat, but even in this own book, a couple characters thought Talon broke. Yeah. So clearly, we're all supposed to think Talon broke, and this is supposed to be a payoff moment. And the fact that you've built this in to be a payoff moment and you've already undermined it to the community felt weird to me. Yeah. And it's making me very hesitant about reading Words of Brandon now, because I'm like, if you're just going to drop things that are going to be plot points, not just like superfluous side.
I would agree with that if it felt like it had been presented as a big reveal in this book, but I feel like it wasn't presented as a big reveal.
I think you're viewing it that way because
I
you
know
already knew it. Yeah. Because
leave a comment if you felt like that was a big reveal for you.
Well, yeah, just the way it was like a bunch of characters like Talon broke finally, you know, like, and then that's the thing. Yeah. Talon's the shit. I love Talon. He's a badass. Never broke. Moves faster than the speed of sound. Beats the shit out of a bunch of heralds and dies off screen. Yeah. I love
heralds have like crazy powers. They're burning ATM.
Yeah, they're either burning ATM or they're burning speed, and they can tap speed or something's going on.
Something's going on. Yeah. So, yeah, I like that. I liked a lot of the Ba'Edo Mishram scenes. I think the like crazy battlefield where she's like on the thing, we get to see from Relane's perspective, the first listeners leaving the scene and like abandoning and Ba'Edo Mishram being confused by it. I think her being like a rival for Odium's power, I thought was really interesting. We still don't really know what the Unmade are. I thought for sure, I was telling you that I thought that she was going to be like Night having been recreated, and then I forgot that like clearly Night Watcher was that or something. So I don't know.
Well, we'll see. But clearly Unmade were Spren
that were corrupted somehow. Yeah, but like pretty powerful Spren. I don't know.
Yeah, it does feel. So this was one of my big complaints around this plot point. Is Bao and Mishram has been hyped up since book 3, basically, where you figure out the thrill can be put in because that's what happened to Bao and Mishram, and that's what caused the recreants. And then book 4, you're continuing to build. In book 5, finally you're going to get Bao and Mishram released. She gets released, and that's cool. And that's it. And you're like, what? You've been hyping this for 3 books. And that's one of those Chekhov's guns where I'm like, she needed to do something or be more relevant than just... The only plot point was that like Relane and Renarin being in love and sticking together, and that's the moment where she got put in the gem, was a singer-human relationship trapping her, and now that's what releases them. And who knows where she's going to go from here, and I'm very interested, but I wish she fucking did something.
Yes, I agree with that. It is, again, many things that were teased in Rhythm of War. This is what we were talking about at the beginning when we said, like, it feels like everything that happened in Rhythm of War was, like, fairly irrelevant to this. We had, like, the tease that they had to go find Ba'Edo Mishram, but, like, again, nothing really happens with her. She just, like, escapes in the cognitive realm. So it just, like, this book, I think, makes Rhythm of War far worse than it already was, just because of how irrelevant it ends up feeling. But... let's put it this way. I'm happy I reread it again before Wind and Truth, because I don't know the next time I'm going to want to reread it, because I feel like it is...
If you reread again,
you're just... I read it right now, I'm going to be like, God, everything in this book is so irrelevant to where we're at. Mark, did Brandon Sanderson sacrifice himself to the woke mob by creating the gay relationship between Renarin and Relane?
Yeah, absolutely.
No, what did you... I guess, like... You and I think are less invested in romantic subplots than I think a lot of readers, but I don't know. That was like one of their main points. Did you have any issues with it?
No, because I swear Renarin and Relane have been like kind of a building thing since
book 3. He had teased it, I think, before Rhythm of War came out, and then when Rhythm of War came out, there's like they're stealing glances at each other or something.
It's beginning to pick up. There's been gay characters in his books before. There's been
setting aside even like the woke stuff, I'm curious, like, what did you think of that subplot?
I was fine with it. I think it's like, in a sense, a bigger and important plot to the microcosm, which is like singers and humans need to come together. Right. And the listeners are kind of doing that. This is kind of doing that, and so I think it's important thematically. Yes. So I don't have a problem with it.
Yeah, I am not super drawn into Renarin or Relane's characters very much. Like, they're fine to read, but I care about them more as vessels for the plot than as individual characters. Similar in some ways to other characters.
It's funny because I liked Renarin a lot more in book 2 and book 3 when he was more mysterious and he was just doing like prophetic things and like kind of like out there. And now that we've gotten more of his POV, I'm like, you're actually kind of boring. Like you. And I guess I know he's autistic or supposed to be autistic coded. I'm pretty sure he's supposed to be autistic. But I don't know. I just it's probably cool to see that as like someone to like read and see yourself in there. But for me, I'm like, I don't.
I mean, let's put it this way. I enjoy reading POVs about characters that represent types of people that I am not, because it actually helps me feel like I'm learning a little bit, and I trust Brandon a lot in the methodology to like seem as though he's accurately conveying at least some of these people's lived experiences. But setting all that aside, there's not a lot in the Renarin or R'Laine stories that I'm like really drawn into. You get a couple moments, you get like R'Laine feeling betrayed by his people whenever nobody's like, hey, don't go.
I'm way more invested in R'Laine of the two. Like to that point, like yes, that's all great for the representation angle, but he's not like a particularly compelling character beyond that. And then R'Laine is in this like world where he doesn't fit in with either camp, and he's upset, but he at least has Renarin to turn to, and so like R'Laine feels much more like an interesting.
You had said at one point in time that one of the things you liked about Adolin is that like you get to learn a lot about Adolin as a person beyond like what his either mental struggles are or otherwise. And I kind of like that is I think what it is for me lacking from R'Laine and Renarin.
Yeah, like Yasna, for example, even like she cares about history and the past, and she has interests beyond her struggles, and that's what's missing with Renarin.
Yes, and I think honestly, I think with R'Laine, I know you like R'Laine, but like I don't know anything about R'Laine.
Well, I think like the whole like I'll be a slave form for you guys to go and do this infiltrate. Like, at least there's like some complex feelings there related to like the world building. Like his complex feelings relate to the world in a clear plot way.
I just would like to know, like, does R'Laine like to drink Horn-Eater White a lot? You know, is he somebody who's yeah, exactly. Like, give me something about this character to identify with.
Yeah, and that applies, like you said, to a fair amount of characters. Whether it's like, what do you do beyond?
Who are you beyond your point for your POV? We should say Dalinar is both of our favorite characters.
Yes, he's one of my favorite, maybe my favorite Brandon Sanderson character ever.
Definitely my favorite Brandon Sanderson character. And I say that partially, and I know this is like heresy to some people. I don't always feel like Brandon's characters are like the strongest that I read compared to some other authors, but Dalinar, ever since good old Oathbringer, has been my favorite. So
even in Way of Kings, I thought like once we got the Kaladin perspective and you zoom out to see the whole battlefield through Dalinar's perspective, and he brought so much context to that world, I really was like, oh, this is the guy I want to follow.
Yeah. So he's just been huge for me. I love so many of his quotes. I have had like a scene of him walking up to the Thrill previously. And I both loved that we got a lot of Dalinar in this book, especially after he was essentially absent for, I don't know, what, 7 years or something since Oathbringer, 6 years. But I was pretty disappointed with the way Brandon handles him at the end. So let's get into, I guess, his storyline on the whole.
Yeah, it's a very complicated emotional relationship with him, this book, because you get a lot of him. He does feel like he's doing a lot, and he's in a lot of interesting situations, but like you said, he did a ton with the whole I am unity, clapping his hands together. Then he fucks off for a book, and then in this book he's mostly just wandering around the spirit realm, getting ready for this contest of champions, which is super hyped up, but then I feel like kind of resolves in a way that's very interesting, but not super,
but not great for his, but from a character, the Dalinar character point of view, like from a Dalinar fan, it is like really disappointing how things go. So let's start at the beginning. So really cool to see him talk to Cultivation. That was like a scene that I thought was really sick. And honestly, as much as I thought it was sick, you and I both discussed how some of the scenes that were really hype in this book felt, because the book had so much to do, like they would have been amazing moments in any other book. And here they're like, that was cool. On to the next thing, you know, and like that was one of those scenes.
They can feel a little info dumpy, a little bit like we got to get through this because.
And the reason I bring it up here is because I think Dalinar's storyline has the most of these, because like you get to see. I remember sitting there reading the scene where like humanity's coming through the portal, the Else Gate or whatever that Ashar has opened. And I'm like, this is so sick, but it also is not dramatized. Like it's just kind of happening. You've got Wit's face melting off in the corner. But it still, it felt, I had mixed feelings about it, because and the Cosmere fan of me was like, this is amazing. But again, like, it's set against the context of these other things that are happening.
Yeah.
I thought it was cool to see so much of the lore through him, see a lot of his reactions to stuff. And I continually was trying to figure out what was going on with him as a character, because like I was like, wait, is Dalinar the bad guy again? Because like Stormfather's like, you're making me do too much.
Well, and I appreciated that struggle because I saw both sides of it, which I thought was good. Because I was like Dalinar as a reader, being like, fucking just give us answers. You know, like it's so frustrating that the characters, you and I were talking about this, were like, Stormfather's always like, I don't know what you're talking about, or oh, it's too painful to remember.
Yes, yeah.
And so like,
Sibling was similar. You have a lot of whiny characters, a lot of whiny spread.
there's a lot of people who know a lot who refuse to elaborate because
Yeah, hey, you're being mean to me. I don't like you.
I'm not
Humans
going to
suck.
tell you. Yeah, and so I can very much relate to Dalinar just being like, answer. But I also see the perspective of being like,
This is why you and I both like Dalinar, because we're both these types of people that are just like, stop with the bullshit, you know.
yeah, but it is true that he steamrolls people. He's a complete steamroller, and so like that push and pull, and again to the point about going back and taking people's past from previous books and making them relevant. The steamrolling of Elhokar and some of those things, while ultimately probably the right thing, did cause a lot of problems.
The Elhokar scene felt really cool to see from a different perspective, and it was neat, similar like the Asuna stuff, that we got to see these other moments that in the past had been positioned to these characters as like badass moments, and now you get, and at the time we're like, oh, it's kind of like ethically crazy they did this, but like, oh, they're such badass, and now it's like, oh yeah, that was not good.
Yeah, you probably shouldn't just like lure people, like honeypot them and then blow them up. So yeah, I thought it was cool to see Dalinar struggle in this book on like an internal level of like, I need answers, I need to be proactive, I need to do things, 'cause I don't know what's going to happen in this contest of champions, but also I don't give a fuck how I get there. I'm going to like bully people however I need.
Yes, and in these sections we get Tanavast chapters, which was super cool. Again, won't go over it too much, but saying I am God, and like the whole page is just capital letters, or I God did this. It's just crazy. You get scenes that I did not think we would get. The only other thing I can think of, and I've told you to read this because you've not read it yet, is Mistborn Secret History, which I won't give spoilers for. But if you liked the Tanavast chapters, I would suggest you read Mistborn Secret History, because the Tanavast chapters I think were really cool for people who are like heavily invested, no pun intended, in the Cosmere. And Secret History, I think, is the only other place where I've seen us go that far deep into like peeling back the.
Well, it was cool for two reasons. One is the lore reasons, and like we even talked about, like some things just happen way too fast, even in these, where you're like, yeah, and then Odium and I slapped each other a little bit above Natanatan, and it like blew up, and there's a fourth moon there, and that's also where the Shard Pool is. Anyways, moving on. You're like, what the hell? And like I talked to you about, like Bao and Mishram picking up the power, as well as Ishar picking up the power, is totally just glossed over in this book. Whereas we were talking about how like that's the entire second book of Mistborn, is like the temporary ascension through the Well of Power. So it's like crazy that it just like is mentioned kind of here. So, but it was cool to contrast that with Tanavast as a human, Tanner, and like Rays, and like just the shit talking, and like Tanner's just, he's a well-meaning guy but kind of a fuck up, as he just like tries to make things better. But
we can see scenes where he's like on Ashen, which is crazy. Like just so many cool conversations, and like even like him regretting that they killed Aiden Alcium at the end, and it was like, oh, maybe that was a oopsie whoopsie, I made a fucky wucky. I may have killed a god. That might have been a bad idea now.
Yeah, and just being like, I'm just gonna lay in the grass for 3,000 years. Everyone's like, bro, we needed you, and he's like, whoops.
The scene where he like the power rejects him, and he just like comes flying out of the sky and like hitting tree branches and collapsing. Is so crazy. Like I really liked all that stuff. I thought it was cool. But getting back to Dalinar,
it's cool that Dalinar got to experience all that, and I think where Dalinar ends up.
Oh, I guess we should say, I called Jumanji Gav.
You called Jumanji Gav.
Yeah, so it's just relevant to those chapters before we get to the ending.
Well, I was going to include that in the ending, because like what Dalinar learns through all of this, and the conclusions he comes to, and what he does in the Contest of Champions, all makes sense, and I think feels good on a philosophical level, but in the moment reading it did feel a little like
Yes. So you're going through all this stuff, and you clearly, there's all these hints where Dalinar is realizing like, okay, this Contest of Champions thing is flawed for a lot of different reasons. One, I don't know how it's going to work. Two, like, Honor was flawed. Like, this was Honor's plan. This was the Stormfather's plan, but, like, their plans have not really gone so well to date.
And their whole plan is like, just keep suffering.
Exactly. He's like,
he's like, pick up the power, hold him here, but then do nothing.
It's almost too modern in terms of a conversation around like the kicking the can down the road for the next generation.
Yeah, it's literally like, just pick up the power, lock him here a little bit longer, and someone will think of something, surely.
Yeah, exactly. We're just going to keep stalling.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of buildup for this, and there were a lot of hints at the idea that like we were going to try, like, Odium's power and Honor's power really kind of like worked well together and stuff. So it felt very clear to me that like something was going to happen where like these two powers converge. Clearly not the first time we've seen this in the Cosmere. And but then the ending just happens so quick, you know?
Well, because you've built up the Contest of Champions, much like L from the end of book 4, and you spent all of book 5, like, how are we going to win the contest? And because it's book 5, I'm not really expecting to win it, but I'm expecting it to be an actual conflict of some kind. And Gav just kind of pops out as an adult. Like, I thought it would have been way more emotionally impactful if he was like a tween or like even younger.
A lot of people at the end of Rhythm of War thought that either Kaladin's younger brother or Gav were going to become like Odium's champion, and Dalinar would be like, I can't kill this like 5-year-old.
And I think there's enough with how much Elhokar was talking to him, how much he was tortured by Spren, that like Gav embracing Odium as his god made sense. It wasn't like a philosophical problem, but like him coming out as Elhokar at 25 and randomly having Oathbringer and like swinging a couple times uselessly at Dalinar before he gets frozen. I was like, okay.
It's like, what is the point of all of this? I mean, you and I talked a lot about like the weirdness around like Taravangian or Odium or whatever yoinking Gav out of Navani's arms and putting like a flesh bag there. Like he's like, oh yeah, I can form flesh in a way that's like pseudo convincing. It's like, what was that? And then he says some line about having to go get like one of his agents to get Oathbringer to get like, because as if he had to get somebody to go into the tower to steal Oathbringer to bring it back into the spirit realm to like it's like, what are we doing here?
It was really overcomplicating the moment, and then
for dramatic tension that I feel like didn't even exist.
No, the dramatic tension didn't really land. Like, I get the theming, but it didn't connect.
Why did he need to have Oathbringer in his hand?
And then he even himself goes like, I could have put any innocent up here, you know, and you would have had the same moral quandary.
Yeah.
And so like, I agree with the moral quandary. I thought that was cool, but it just like emotionally wasn't resonating. And then he like disappears in the Nohadon vision for a period of time as he ascends, because he says the right words. I like the words.
The Nohadon scene. Oh yeah.
I like the whole like, I understand you. Yeah. That's what Honor wants.
Yeah, there was a lot of like conversation around like what is the deal with Honor. We got to see that Honor is, for a long time, Brandon has talked about how like you leave investiture alone for too long and it starts to like form some sort of personality, and like clearly Honor is doing that. The Nohadon scene is interesting. It continues to raise a lot of questions.
That's one of those guns where I'm like, what the hell is Nohadon?
Yeah. So got to figure out what's going on there at some point, I guess. But yeah, I was just pretty disappointed by the fact that like Dalinar's like, I know, I'll just release the power, which is basically what Vin does at the end of book 2 of Mistborn. Which is like fine, but it felt a little too similar to me. It merges in, and then like he just dies unceremoniously.
Yeah, I thought that was probably the moment where I went, like I was with it the whole time, waiting to see where it went, and then like he just kind of dies in the storm by getting hit in the back of the head with like rocks or something.
And we were talking about the Kaladin Day 1 thing. This is in contrast to Kaladin, who gets this giant day to say goodbye to.
And he's still alive and fine, and he's even like in a higher station, whereas Dalinar just kind of dies on a rooftop alone.
Yeah, like it was unclear to me why, like I guess I need to go back and reread it, but for a while I was confused as to why people didn't go up onto the rooftop with him. Like he's like hanging out in the Urithiru attic with like Wit and Navani, and they're both like, you got this, bro. And he's like, cool. And he like walks up to the top and is alone. Like, why? I don't know why they can't come up, or like why he's not, you know, I had imagined this idea that other people would be up there, and this whole scene takes place, and then he just loses according to everybody else. Like obviously some people know, but like like there's like scenes where he gets to cut off, and then the worst part is the Blackthorn part, where we not only is Dalinar dead in a pretty unceremonious way,
but he resisted odium for 5 books as like one of his key plot points is like, I will not give in and give my pain up.
Yeah. And then Taravangian's like, oh, cool, I'll just make I'll make a Temu odium.
I've got the dropship version.
Yeah.
Or what is it called?
Yeah. Shein version. I don't know. Whatever. It's just like, I don't know. It feels for me, it feels a little cheesy. And so I'm really hoping that like other people feel this way and will voice this opinion over the course of the next decade. And then much in the same way that Elle was teased at the end of book 4 and we got basically nothing with him in this. Like, the Blackthorn will be teased and we'll get nothing about him in the next book.
Yeah. I mean, so it did feel deflating. It was very hand-wavy. It didn't seem to me to make much sense. I know he put the memories in the Blackthorn, but then there was also the lines like, the Blackthorn was more than a person. It was a concept. And it's like, well, there's a lot of characters, like Vin, who is a concept.
Kelsier.
Oh, Kelsier's still kind of around, but like, yeah, like there's characters who have died and like have been well enough known in their worlds to, in theory, occupy the same space, but without the memory injection. Yeah. So it's like a little confusing. It felt kind of hand wavy.
Yeah, it feels very much. The problem that Brandon runs into with a lot of his stuff is that because he is so, like, his stuff feels so reasoned out. Like, hey, if something happens, it's because it's 1, been telegraphed, 2, we've painted a magic system that allows it to happen, and 3, like, it feels like the natural evolution of all these things converging, is that when something like that doesn't happen, it feels really bad, which is, I think, is what's happening here, where, like, I'm like, this does not feel good. And even from a character perspective, it just feels lame.
Yeah, I think that happens. And I think the only saving grace that why I have not, like, completely turned on this part of the story is because it's unclear exactly that Dalinar is fully dead. Yeah. So as Odium's trying to grab him, as retribution, he's like, this soul is claimed to another and he goes to the beyond. Yes. But you're like, wait, did he actually go to the beyond, or is that just Taravangian's perspective because the soul is claimed by another, like cultivation or maybe valor or something else is going on? And I hope that's the case because it also feels like there's a lot of unresolved plot lines that Dalinar was like the conduit for.
Dalinar was spending a lot of time in this book also philosophizing about like, oh, I think there is a god and he's beyond honor, or like, even if I don't, even if honor's dead, like I still believe in another god. And it's very unclear if that's like, if that is just Dalinar like being a religious person and thinking like, hey, alluding to the idea that there is something out there in the same way that people will have faith in general without like proof. Or if that's like him alluding to Adenalcium, or I don't know if he's like, Valor's actually my boy,
I assume it's Brandon's, as he said in his word of Brandon's before, like, I will never confirm or deny like a true afterlife kind of god beyond my magic system gods. And so maybe that's Dalinar believing in that thing. Yeah. But there's also the whole like, I am unity, and he claps his hands together, and Odium's like, we killed you. And it's like, wait, are you talking about Tanavast? Are you talking about Adenalcium? What are you talking about here? Yeah. And how did Dalinar do that? And what is unity and unite them? And who is putting that voice in your head saying unite them? Yeah. What was that about? Was that a Dawn Shard or not? Yeah. And then what is Nohadon? Like, there's so many things related to Dalinar that I really hope he's not actually dead. And if he's just dead and we just get flashbacks or something, and the rest of it is just Blackthorn, and Blackthorn's in the back half and not real Dalinar, that's when I'll be like, this feels pretty shit.
Yeah, I listened to a little bit of the 17 Shard podcast, and I know some of them were like decrying the theory that Dalinar would still be alive because they felt, I think, not to put words in their mouth, but my sense was that it was because they thought that it would like cheapen his death. But I'm like, no, his death is already cheap. That's why we need it to not be like...
It's a little damned if you do, damned if you don't, because for people who it's like, oh, that was pretty final. If you bring him back, it's now not. But for people like us, where we're like, that's it?
It just feels really... I agree with it's damned if you do and damned if you don't, even on another front, which is like, there are a lot of characters in Brandon's work who die but don't actually die, or they come back. Like even in this, in the series, we have Zeth dying at the end of Words of Radiance, and then Neil comes back and like staples his body back, the spirit back to the body. And so it does become bad. Like, it's always not great whenever you end up in a world where like death feels so inconsequential because people can just come back all the time. On the other hand, I think he has done a usually good job of like sending people off with honors or having characters feel really good. Dalinar is clearly like a central character from at least the first half of Cosmere. So it just felt really bizarre, and that's why it feels like it's hard to imagine that this was Brandon's solution to Dalinar as a character.
Considering he loves Dalinar too, yes. It feels like. So it definitely feels like either Blackthorn will somehow betray Retribution and become more like real. I don't know what's going to happen, but it just feels weird.
Yeah.
I think, to step back, that what he actually accomplished with his sacrifice was cool. That's not really the problem. The fact that he unites all the shards against Retribution by making Retribution a threat, unleashing him from the Rosharan system, being like, you guys have to deal with this. We can't keep punting the can down the road. It's now a problem for everyone. Big risk, big gamble, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So that was cool. But it did feel like, kind of like, and then like the fact that the Oath Pact still worked didn't feel like part of his plan, like.
I mean, he has the line where he's like, oh, Kaladin would make the sacrifice. Like, he seems to know Kaladin will become a herald because he's like seeing all this different stuff. But yeah, it is. It does seem,
he doesn't seem to know that they can redo the Oath Pact and save all the Spren. Yeah. That was not super clear. Maybe he knew somehow, but it did feel like a big risk. But like, I like the idea that he gave up the power, gave it to the Honor, or to Odium, create Retribution, create a big cosmic threat. Everyone go deal with it.
I really like the scene, like the thought that like all the other shards are like turning and like, oh, what's up? Because you and I both talked about how it was been annoying for a while that like all the other shards were like, man, not my problem. And so it feels cool that he's like, nope, now your problem. But I will just finally say that like, yeah, the Dalinar ending is definitely my least favorite thing about this book. I like the sort of escalation that his ending creates, where like, again, the powers come together, everybody else, but I just, as a character moment, it felt really rough. And I say that not even just because he's my favorite character, but just because like it felt kind of throwaway. So
yeah, the fact that the conflict with Gav didn't quite land, and then he just kind of dies protecting him on a rooftop, getting clubbed to death, and then everyone just shows up and they're like, ah, shit, he's
dude.
Really
for context, everybody, I messaged Mark like day 2 or whatever, like right as Gav went in, and I was like, dude's gonna come out and it's gonna be like Jumanji, because I'm like, why else would they throw him in there, dude? Like, I wish that Brandon had figured out something else to have him do other than be in every scene whining and being like, Gran, I want to go home.
I can hear my dad.
Yeah, like it. And maybe the dad part was there was to telegraph like the Odium stuff or whatever, but like it just felt so obvious to me that like there's a reason why he's in the spirit realm with them. Something's gonna happen. And so I just whatever. But let's talk about the final things. Really liked Shallan talking to Kelsier.
Yep, that was cool.
Like the idea. Here's my big thing. I told Mark, I think it's super cool that we are out of universe or out of book experiencing the same thing that's happening in universe, which is we're going to spend the next 10 years advancing the Cosmere and all these other worlds, and then we come back to Roshar. And Roshar is locked away for 10 years, and and all the other places are gonna advance over the next like 80 or so years. So I thought that was, I don't know if that was, I'm sure Brandon didn't plan out his like writing schedule based on so that it would sync with like in-world universe stuff, but it is like kind of a neat thing that is happening.
Yeah, I thought it was cool, and I also think, I'm sure we'll still get a little bit of Roshar from Ghostbloods, which is called the third era of Mistborn. So like clearly they're gonna interface, and like there's now a galactic war going on across all of the Cosmere as these shards have to deal with Odium, who won't really become a threat in the next 10 years because he's still kind of figuring his shit out. Yeah. But at some point, Retribution's going to show up and they're going to have to deal with him. So like now this is like we were in maybe the Cold War phase, or maybe this is the start of the Cold War.
We're starting Cold War, yeah.
Yeah, we're starting the Cold War.
Mistborn Era 3 is explicitly a Cold War.
Yeah, well, it's the spy thriller thing. Yeah. So yeah, I think all that's cool. I like where the Cosmere is going as a whole.
Yeah, I liked a lot of this book. It was a lot. I told Mark that I wish
this 2-hour-ish video.
I told Mark that I wish that some of the big reveals or big lore dumps or big histories or all that type of stuff had been in some of the previous books. because it felt like we were just kind of like speeding through a lot of stuff, but it was really, you know, I felt gorged at the end of it because I was just like, I just ate all of this lore and all this stuff, and I just, now I feel a little like nauseous from eating too much.
You need to have like your food coma, like digest, where we're just like, so wait, again, Honor did say that. Tanavas said that, this line here. What does this line mean?
I'm just, I'm Nightblood having been shoved into Odium. Just
Dude,
like,
Nightblood having surges? What the hell?
Yeah, that's crazy. There's so much good stuff. We could talk about this for another 2 hours.
Yeah, this is what we did before. We talked for about 3 hours when we first talked.
There's so many fun little things that this book did that I think will be really exciting. But that's it for this. I don't know. I think we'll be back next week with another book for the book channel for our weekly updates.
Yeah, once every 52, 70 something.
Anyway, thanks everyone for watching. I'm happy that Mark was able to make time for this, and thanks to Brandon Sanderson for writing this. If you haven't seen my interview with Brandon, I did right before Wind of Truth. It's over on my main channel. I'd be surprised if you hadn't, but either way, thanks everyone for watching. Bye.